Hey guys, what's going on? This is Matt Wenning at winningstrength.com. And today I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about factors that are affecting hypertrophy, and some of these you may not have heard of. For a lot of us, most of us that start our gym journey, or what gets us into the gym, is hypertrophy. We want to get bigger. We want to have bigger muscles. We want people to look at us when we walk, or used to walk in the mall. Now it's not so much. I remember, walking through the grocery store with my mom and looking at the magazines with the guys and girls on there that lifted weights, and it intrigued me to want to lift weights to play football. So a lot of times we can have our draw into lifting weights to want to play sports. But there's a lot of us that just do it for aesthetic reasons, and I think there's a lot of confusion on what's the best way to develop hypertrophy. So with that being said, let's get to the video. Now, before we start the video, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the seminars that we have coming up at the facility. One, we have a bench press seminar on the website that's going to be done at the Arnold Classic on the Saturday of the Arnold. So if you're not enrolled in that and you want to get some good bench press tips and do it safer and get bigger, definitely join that. Another one we have with Stan Efferding, the world's strongest bodybuilder, is going to be in Toronto at the end of March as well. And we also have another seminar coming up in Seattle in May. So if your goal is hypertrophy, you definitely want to make it to some of those seminars in order to figure out how to do it safer, longer, and obviously get bigger, because you're not going to be worried about bumps and bruises and injuries along the way. But my first real inclination into hypertrophy was my mom purchased me at about the age of 14 Arnold's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding. Now, this was a very extensive book with a lot of exercises that the beginners had never seen before, including myself. Lots of different exercises on triceps and legs and things that I had never thought, even existed, let alone dreamed up, which was done in Arnold's era back in the 70s. Created a lot of really high quality muscle at that time. Another big thing is growing up in the 80s was you had Stallone and Van Damme movies all the time showing a lot of different muscle and just getting people intrigued to wanting to go to the gym. That was never really the case in generations before. Yes, the 50s had Charles Atlas, and the 60s had a lot of guys that were, strong football players. You had Arnold Schwarzenegger first starting to come on the scene, but a lot of that was just kind of backwoods, not really up front in total mainstream area until about the 80s. Is when muscle really came into play, which was my generation growing up. And I think what we need to start to understand is there are some key factors that if we want to be really good at developing muscle that we need to keep in mind. The first thing that I think we need to look at is volume. Now, volume is huge, and if you're new to this, volume is sets and reps. Sets and reps play a crucial role in how much hypertrophy is not only possible, but there is also a heavy and strong correlation to the dose and response relationship, meaning the more sets within reason, the more hypertrophy that you're going to get. Now, we'll get into rep ranges a little bit later, but let's just talk total volume in general. Between 10 and 20 sets is where research says that hypertrophy is most utilized, meaning that somewhere between 10 and 20 sets per week is where the muscle tends to respond to training very, very well. In my personal opinion, I split this right in the middle of that and do about 7 to 8 sets per muscle group per training session twice a week, adding up to roughly about 16 sets in each muscle group. For a lot of the workouts that we put in the manuals on Patreon and TrainHeroic, if you look at the total voluminous sets of these exercises, this falls along the line pretty damn well to each muscle group within different periodization ranges that we're hitting maximal hypertrophy and growth. I think that splitting this up between 72 hours is also heavily crucial for restoration. Not only is the restoration important for the muscle tissue for hypertrophy, but also I think it's crucial to make sure that the ligaments and tendons are also getting enough time to adapt to the training as well. So again, I think that sweet spot is somewhere around 7 or 8 sets per session and roughly 2 sessions per muscle group per week, separated between 72 hours. If you can follow this rule, this will help you tremendously in building a decent amount of muscle tissue. Now, for most of us, this has been heavily debated, and that is load. And load constitutes of how heavy is the actual implement that we're trying to utilize. And most times this is based off of a 1RM. So are we using 60%, 70%, 80%? Which percentage range is most optimal? And the answer is we still really don't know. Now, there's been a lot of data on the moderate range between 8 and 12 repetitions is ideal for hypertrophy at around 70 to 75%. But as more research comes out over the last 5 and 10 and 15 years, we're starting to see that repetition ranges can change from 1 to 20 in a various amount of percentage ranges, all the way down in 30 and 40%, which constitutes obviously the winning warm-ups. But the reason that we see so much difference in this and so much conflicting data, and also so much just out in front of us data, right? Like we see guys like Ronnie Coleman who lifted extremely heavy to put on crazy amounts of muscle tissue, where that was non-traditional bodybuilding. You almost trained like a power lifter. Conversely, at the same time, you have guys like Jay Cutler who trained lighter, higher repetitions, never really went to ultimate failure or maxed, and got similar results with muscle mass. I think that this can be somewhat explained due to genetics. Some people are going to respond better with type 1, type 2 fibers. They're going to have a different makeup genetically that's going to allow their body to respond to training in a different way. So if you have a lot of type 2X fiber, training insanely heavy may put on more muscle mass. But if you're more type 1 fiber, then doing higher repetitions at slower speeds may be helpful as well. I think we really don't know until we push the upper echelon of our own genetics of what we're really going to respond to. But you find that, in my opinion, and maybe this is powerlifting biased, is that if you get stronger and focus on being strong first, your ability to use weights that would be in some cases maximal for others for repetitions opens up a vast array of doors for hypertrophy. For example, if all I can bench is 315, which is a great bench, then I'm going to be limited to how many reps I can do with 225. But if I can bench 500 pounds, how many reps would I be able to do with 225 then? And what would the loads look like at 70% or 80% if that is true for hypertrophy? Again, if I can use someone's maximum for repetitions in the 8, 12, maybe 15 rep range, my ability to be more hypertrophied and larger muscle mass is definitely got a huge advantage. So again, it comes down to being stronger, but I would say that probably somewhere between the ranges of 70 to 85% is going to be your sweet spot. But just know that there are other percentages that can help you out tremendously depending on your fiber type makeup. One of the final things I wanted to go over that kind of blends all of this together is time under tension. And this is how long do these reps and sets take? And for a lot of us, we don't think of training that way. We think of training in reps. So we see it, we're doing a set of 8, we're doing a set of 12, we're doing a set of 15, whatever the case may be. But I would try, if you can, to put yourself on a stopwatch and see how long your sets take. Does your set of 6 take 25 seconds? Does it take 35 seconds? This starts to play into account possibly tempos, how fast you're moving, because at the end of the day, if we want to make sure we're attacking as much muscle tissue as possible, we probably want an optimal tempo for that. Now, there's been all kinds of studies from all over the place showing slower tempos are not really beneficial and normal movement patterns are the best, and slightly slower like 2-2 tempos are awesome. But I think what we should focus on in this video is how long does the actual set take? And that's going to come down to around 40 to 60 seconds. So if your set of 10 or 12 takes 40 to 60 seconds, which is going to be roughly a 3-3 tempo or a 2-2 tempo, depending on those repetition ranges, that's going to put you in a more optimal hypertrophy range. So if your idea of getting insane amounts of muscle in the gym, don't always just count your sets. You might want to start looking at your time. So again, try to time your stuff around 45 seconds to a minute. We'll do stuff on a 2-2 tempo or a 3-3 tempo, and we won't count the reps, we'll count the time. sometimes for 45 seconds, sometimes for 60 seconds. You'll see this done quite a bit in the Winning Strength manuals, especially in power building and hypertrophy, due to this research and my own personal experiences over the last 25 years. But I still find it interesting that a lot of people don't use timed sets. And if your goal is hypertrophy, make sure you're timing your sets and make sure that you're hitting that time. At around 45 seconds, you should be burning and uncomfortable so bad that you want to stop, like near failure. So here's the thing. I think if you're training around the 8 to 12 rep range, you're hitting your sets in around 45 to 60 seconds. There's some other things that we covered about volume, right? So if we're doing around 7 to 8 sets per exercise or per muscle group per workout, separating between 72 hours, we're going to put ourselves in a really good condition in order to put on a lot of hypertrophy in muscle. Now, if we're trying to get super strong, some of this is still usable, but it has to be usable in certain instances, right? You don't necessarily want to play around a ton with compound movements and doing tempo level training. Now, it's really good for developing obviously technique, but we want to focus on rate of force if we're worried about being strong. If we're working on strength, sometimes this stuff is really more applicable to your accessory work. So this is Matt Wenning at winningstrength.com. I hope this video maybe shed some light on training if you're a beginner, intermediate, or maybe advanced, something you forgot, and start bringing back in timed sets and start focusing on things that matter with hypertrophy, which is going to be making sure you get enough sets in per week. If you're a professional bodybuilder, you're probably going to need 20 sets per muscle per week. If you're just beginning, 7, 8, 10 sets will work really well. In my opinion, for optimization for other types of contractile properties like maximal effort strength and dynamic effort strength, somewhere around 7 or 8 sets per workout per muscle group is going to be very, very close in order to hit all those parameters. So I hope this video helps you guys out a lot, and I hope to see you guys at winningstrength.com.